I am the stone that the builder refused. I am the visual, the inspiration that made ladies sing the blues. I'm the spark that makes your idea bright. The same spark that lights the dark so that you can know your left from your right. I am the ballad in your box, the bullet in the gun, the inner glow that let you know to call your brother son. The story that just begun, the promise of what's to come. And I'ma remain a soldier till the war is won. Chop, 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 you don't flip. Chop, 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 you don't flip. Chop, chop, chop.
We are interrupting the program for some breaking news.
Ladies with gentle hands, a mindless mag player is causing trouble in the Orkin system. This can only mean that Suckmutt is finally releasing his mag video.
We are unsure what he's exactly doing, but by the looks of it, he is at least cooking a little bit.
Well, obviously I'm cooking. If it's good or not, I don't know. But I know I have at least one thing I'm good at. I'm just so good at wasting our time. We are the lazy generation. We are the lazy generation. We are the lazy generation now. Stand up and shout. We will be there for you. We are the lazy generation. We are the lazy generation. We are the lazy generation. We are so back. Remember when I said like 3 months ago that I would do a Mac Part 2? Finally! Mac Part 2! Welcome back to my personal therapy session where I talk about Mac again for a redacted amount of time. Last time I focused on my personal bias and what makes Mac fun for me to play personally, while still tackling topics like her kit and weapons that I like to use with her. Today I will do the same yet again, but a little bit more in depth, if you couldn't tell by the fucking length of this video. But before we get into any of the crazy stuff, let's get one of the most asked questions from the previous video out of the way first.
I'm a pretty boy living on the west side, living so loud you could never hear me cry.
I'm using Mac's heirloom skin. This skin was only available during Warframe's 10th anniversary. AKA, if you don't have it, you can't get it anymore. If you really want to be sad about it, it's up to you, because in the end, these packs were really overpriced. But for those of you who are still interested, I'm pairing it with the Huitzilin Syandana from the Styanax Deluxe, as well as with the Solena Ephemera, the Ornis chestplate as well as shoulder plate, and goddamn with the Rivelite guard legs. With that out of the way, let's get actually started and talk about Mag. Mag has been in the game since day one, as one of the original 8 Warframes available when Warframe launched in its closed beta back in 2012. At the time, she was widely considered as the worst Warframe in the game, and I can't fucking blame them, man. Like, Polarize used to be a single target ability, and what the fuck is a bullet attractor? Okay, let's just say she evolved a little bit over time, but diving into her history would just take me way too long. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend checking out Nova Umbral's video on Mag's history. We love supporting small creators. Nowadays, Mag is one of the 3 starter Warframes available at the beginning of the game, alongside Excalibur and Vault. Alternatively, you can obtain her by purchasing her main blueprint from the in-game market and farming her parts from the Sergeant assassination on Iliad Phobos. Or you can also complete the full second week rotation of the circuit after finishing the Devere Paradox quest. Her entire kit is designed with a strong emphasis on crowd control, so let's take a closer look at it. Mag has one of the weakest, if not the worst passive in the entire game. It allows any nearby loot within an 8-meter radius of her to be pulled towards her for easier collection. However, this doesn't stack with similar mods like Vacuum or Fetch on companions. Instead, it gets overwritten by whichever factor has the higher range value, making it irrelevant almost instantly. Pull costs 25 energy and creates a magnetic vortex, drawing in all enemies within a 25-meter radius and a 90-degree angle in front of you, as well as those within a 6-meter radius around the vortex. The 6 meter pull around the vortex is set to a fixed value, which means it cannot be increased by ability range. All enemies affected are ragdolled, pulled in front of Mag, and take up to 300 magnetic damage. It comes with an augment mod called Greedy Pull, which gives it the additional ability to pull pickups towards you, making it easier to collect resources and ammo. At its core, Pull is a great way to group up enemies, which can be very useful when dealing with Void Cascade Actualizers, but it's also a very great defensive ability. For example, Interception. When an enemy tries to take over a tower, you can always cancel their mischievous wrongdoings by casting Pull, at least as long as they're not covered up in Overguard oil. It can also be an amazing tool to manage your ammo economy or energy economy. We'll see that later when we get to the gameplay bits of the video. In addition, you will gain Pull as a helmet ability when you decide to subsume Mag. Wie cool ist das bitte? Magnetize costs 50 energy and creates a magnetic field around an enemy, anchoring the target in place. While active, the initial target that the bubble is applied on will receive double the amount of damage relative to your ability strength. The field, better known as Bubble, pulls nearby enemies towards its center as long as the initial target is alive. Well, not quite really. It will actually keep pulling enemies towards its center until the corpse of the initial target will no longer be rendered. It has infinite casting range as long as your target is within your line of sight. Note that it's also applicable to Overguard units, just without the rooting part of the ability. Any projectiles, whether from enemies or allies that hit the bubble, are redirected to its center. Inside of the bubble, the projectiles will receive additional radiation damage, which allows your enemies to hit themselves with their own projectiles, on top of your own. The accumulated damage that is happening inside the bubble will be stored inside of it. The bubble takes 25% of the base damage per projectile and will deal that value as magnetic damage to all enemies within the bubble. This damage is applied in half-second ticks. Please note that when I'm talking about base damage, it means the bubble only takes account for mods like plus damage, status effects, damage to factions, or even multi-shot. Modding for critical damage will not benefit the bubble's damage output. The tick damage decreases based on how far an enemy is away from its center, down to a minimum of 50% damage dealt. If the initial target dies while magnetized, the bubble destabilizes and explodes at the end of its duration for 300 blast damage in a 15 meter radius. This happens in addition to your accumulated base damage dealt per projectile for each tick that is happening inside of the bubble. Sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. Let me explain. To visualize this information, we're gonna use an unmodded Arca Plasmor which has 600 base damage. We're gonna cast a bubble on a charger unit as it has no form of damage reduction, and we shall see the results on another charger unit. We cast the bubble, shoot the Plasmor, let the bubble do its thing, and we get a total of 8 damage ticks. If we apply the math behind this, aka the 25% of the 8 times we inflicted 600 damage with an additional 300 damage on top, we should get 1500 damage at point blank from the bubble. Epic. While the damage of the explosion spreads in a 15 meter radius, it will suffer from a damage fall off the further an enemy is away to the explosion. The explosion is not just limited to duration, but instead can also be triggered by a 4th bubble while 3 others are active, as the first bubble that got casted will start to destabilize. You can also manually trigger an explosion by utilizing Magnetized Discharge. Discharge also allows for enemies that are caught in the explosion to have a 50% chance to be disarmed, as well as increasing the bubble range by up to 45%. If you thought that was way too much information on an ability, well, Magnetize also has a hold version. Well, I mean, it's kind of ass, so I'll cut this shorter. When holding down Magnetize, Mag will start building up 25 blast damage per second, while additionally providing immunity to bullets in a 4 meter radius. The incoming projectiles are absorbed by the singularity and their damage will be stored inside of it as well as, you know, Magnetize normally would. But instead, the stored projectile damage will be multiplied by 2, but it will still hold 300 initial blast. This is like fucking trash. When the duration ends or the ability is recasted, you release all stored damage in front of Mag as an explosive blast. It will damage all enemies in an angle of 120 degrees and up to 50 meters away. Please note that while you're using the hold version of Magnetize, Mag will significantly slow down, which opens you up to incoming damage from melee-based enemies. Well, that was a lot of info on Magnetize. It's an amazing ability to deal a lot of damage on its explosion, as well as crazy amounts of additional DPS when you use the bubble properly to your own advantage with the right tools. For example, by applying Viral on your enemies for a 325% damage boost at 10 stacks. Or using the right weapons with the bubble in the first place, but we'll get into that later. Magnetize is not just a pure damage ability, but also a great defensive ability, which keeps projectiles away from you as long as you're not inside of the bubble, or at least as long as you're not in a bullet's trajectory. With all its upsides, it also comes with a fair share of downsides, as it can also easily lower your team's DPS if placed in rather unfortunate places, or if no targets are inside of it at all, turning your bubble into a Walmart limbo cataclysm essentially.
Hold your words, relic guy, for I am the limbo guy. Everyone thinks he is terrible. Everyone thinks he is a troll, when I am the one displaying his magnificence and power.
Yeah man, we totally believe you. Hold Magnetize is just kind of in a way for me personally, because if I cast it, it's most definitely on accident. The Hold version of Magnetize is supposed to be some protective variant of it, but since there's still gonna be creatures that will just go and try to beat you up with an iron rod while you're slowed and can't properly fucking move, see how mad I just got there? I see no fucking point in using it. Okay, to be fair, I tried making good use of it, but I always end up just opting for the actual bubble for a protective measure instead. But hey, your experience might differ from mine. Just saying. Polarize costs 75 energy and by far doesn't take as long to explain as Magnetize. It emits a spherical pulse of magnetism from Mag, starting with an 8 meter radius, which rapidly expands outwards over 5 seconds to a maximum radius of 37.5 meters. When Pulse hits an enemy with a shield, it will drain your target's shield relative to your ability strength. The same is applicable to enemies with armor. Their armor will be stripped permanently while additionally suffering true damage equal to the amount of armor removed. Allies hit by the Pulse have their shield restored by up to 400 shield points, including but not limited to Tenno, companions, hostages, specters, or other mission objectives like cryopods and excavators. Note that the shield restoration from Polarize will not flow over into Overshield. All drained enemies will produce an outburst of magnetic energy, inflicting up to 250% of the drained shields or armor as magnetic damage within a 4 meter radius. The explosion radius is increased by 0.55 meters for each meter the pulse grows outwards after the initial radius. Enemies who have been drained are not damaged by their own explosion, but they can be damaged by nearby enemies who are also drained. Enemies that get hit by Polarize will drop a so-called Polarize shard that lingers for 30 seconds with a 50% chance to drop another one. These shards are automatically picked up by Mag once she is within 3 meters of them. They will start orbiting around her and attack enemies within a meter of her. Polarize shards inflict 50 damage distributed evenly between Puncture and Slash, with a guaranteed status proc for both Puncture and Slash on your enemy, scaling with the total shields and or armor drained. In combination with Magnetize, yes, we're talking about Magnetize again, the bubble is capable of absorbing the Polarized shards, trapping the shards within the bubble, allowing them to do immense damage thanks to the fact that Polarized shards are not restricted to any form of hit registrations. Alongside that, Pull can also bring Polarized shards to Mag, even without Greedy Pull equipped. Its augment mod, Counterpulse, allows Polarize to additionally jam enemy weapons and disable robotic enemies for up to 4 seconds on contact. Polarize is far away from being a bad ability, but still ends up as my subsume slot most of the time. While the shards can go crazy with the Magnetize bubble, the final damage it accumulates inside of it without armor stripping or a viral buff applied isn't worth it in my opinion, or at least it isn't if you're not directly building for it.
Bufuck not, Nourish exist. What the fuck man?
I know, but we're still talking about the base kit, aren't we? Anyways, it's the same with the augment. It's nice to jam enemy weapons, but a mag bubble can also just eat up the bullets. The shield regeneration is nice to have, but Loki gets overshadowed by Mag's last ability. Crush costs 100 energy and suspends all enemies within an 18 meter radius in the air and forcefully compresses their bodies. It inflicts 1500 damage relative to your ability strength. The damage is evenly divided into 3 ticks, with each tick dealing 1/3 of the total damage. On the final tick, enemies will be knocked back down to the ground, silencing them for a second in total. Mag and her allies can restore up to 75 shields for each enemy hit by a crush tick. Unlike Polarize, the shield restoration that Crush provides can flow into Overshield. But this is only limited to you and your teammates, as well as companions and specters. Everything else will restore shields normally without flowing into Overshield. Crush has no line of sight checks, allowing it to be used for great evasive maneuvers and constant shield gating. Fracturing Crush allows Crush's casting speed to be increased by 50% and the armor of enemies to be reduced by 75%. The armor reduction from Fracturing Crush scales with ability strength, which allows us to do full strips at 134 ability strength. Additionally, Fracturing Crush will immobilize enemies for up to 7 seconds. As I've already said, Crush is not just a great crowd control ability, but it's also amazing at keeping your own and your teammates' asses alive in harsh situations. The additional armor strip makes up for such an insanely strong ability. The Augment mod as well just overshadows Polarize's Augment mod, but not just that, but a lot of similar abilities as well. Shout out Pillage, I don't like you. Overall, Mag is an insanely powerful frame when you get fully comfortable with her kid. Mag doesn't rely on stupid overpowered one-shot abilities to be good, but instead her mechanics, combos and synergies, which is why I love to play her so much. But speaking of stupid and overpowered, selecting a weapon that synergizes well with Mag and especially her bubble is kind of important to actually tickle the most out of Mag in terms of strength. But surely guns won't matter that much, right?
Yo, Mr. Dope Man, you think you're slick. You sold crack to my sister and now she's sick. But if she happened to die because of your drug, I'm putting in your culo a 38 slug.
Mag's gunplay is by far my most favorite part about her, and it's also one of the big reasons why she can get quite stupid. There's a wide variety of weapons that work well with Mag. There are more decent picks than there are bad ones. So I picked some of my favorite ones, as well as some of the weapons that were mentioned in the comments of Mag Part 1. If you feel like I missed something, leave them in the comments, and I will maybe, maybe I'll yap about them in a future video or something. Mag Part 3 confirmed. Fuck no. As said earlier, shooting into the bubble allows for projectiles to be sent into the middle of the bubble, where they will hit enemies inside of it. AKA, weapons that work really well with Mag are mostly projectile based, with punch-through slapped on top of it. So what happens if we throw infinite punch-through to the mix? Well, it will hit each enemy inside of the bubble once, and from there on out continues to linger inside of the bubble waiting for new enemies to be sucked in. As perfectly seen here with these death laws. This is what I consider as hit registrations. If an enemy gets hit by the projectile, that enemy will register the hit from the projectile and will no longer be applicable for another hit from the same projectile. Now, wouldn't it be awesome if we could somehow bypass this stupid limitation? Yep, there are ways, but only a few things hold such power. For example, the earlier mentioned Polarize shards. Once they get sucked up by the bubble, they will start shredding inside of it. But that's not the crazy one-shot we all want, right? Now, wouldn't it be awesome if we could get the same power onto a gun? Introducing the Tenet Arca Plasmor. My baby. You can get this piece of shit from the Sisters of Tavos. It features a very unique trait, which allows the projectile shot from it to ricochet. That alone doesn't sound too crazy, right? But this makes enemies applicable for a second hit. Each time the projectile bounces off of a wall or the floor, it will reset the hit registration on an enemy. Well, at least if it worked as intended. Because each time the projectile hits an enemy, it will also count as a ricochet. That means if we hit a target like this guy before we hit another one, we can actually reset the hit registration from the previously hit enemy. Now if we test this shit with the Mag bubble, yeah, it kinda fucks. And the more we talk about it, the more stupid it fucking gets. The Tenet Arca Plasmor is a projectile-based weapon, which means it scales multiplicatively with its galvanized Guncio mod. But I'm a stupid person and I would never talk about Guncio on this channel, right? When talking about Guncio or Gun Condition Overload, we're talking about the Steel Path galvanized variants of the weapon's respective status transmods, which act in the same way as Condition Overload on melees, with 40% additional direct damage to an enemy for each status effect you inflict on them, up to a maximum of 2 times, or 80% additional damage dealt. This is for Galvanized Savvy, for example. While non-projectile or hit scan weapons will in most cases have the CO bonus applied to them additively, as intended, Most of the projectile-based weapons in the game will have their CO bonus calculated multiplicatively, allowing for big damage. Now that we know what multiplicative gun CO means, we can add a primer into the mix, make use of magnetic as the progenitor element, which adds damage to shield and overguard enemies, add viral to the Arca Plasmor and... whoops. Anyways, here's my full build. While this is cool, you always want to make sure that you have as many enemies in the bubble as possible to deal the maximum amount of damage. And if we have enough enemies inside of it, the damage output will be so high that it's not worth to mod for many other elements. Multiple hit registration sounds very fun with the changes made to Blast in the Status 2.0 update. So what if we could get a weapon that doesn't deal super high damage, but has multiple hit registrations?
Will it blend? That is the question.
You may be asking yourself, Suck, are you completely fucking insane? Yes, my friend, I am oogly goo. When you're shooting the Secura Penta, it will ship out a mail package which you can blow up by pressing Alt Fire. But we're not the Unabomber. Instead, we will abuse the projectile itself, because it can actually deal damage and proc status on enemies. I use the Secura Penta as it features the best base stats from all 3 variants. Why are there 3 fucking variants of this gun? This gun has 1 use. Modding for Blast Electric and using Hunter munitions gets kinda fucking stupid. The main idea is to take advantage of Blast and Electric because they work really well when enemies are grouped close together, since both Blast and Electric damage can hit multiple targets at once. As Blast can deal an AoE explosion upon reaching 10 stacks for 300% of your weapon's damage, and Electric damage chaining to other enemies. Hunter Munitions is added to boost the DPS by applying slash procs, even when only a few enemies are inside of the bubble, ensuring a consistent damage output in both large and small enemy groups. It doesn't feature Mold CO, but it still fucks. Here's the build. Ted Kaczynski would be so proud of this. But it's not actually in honor of Ted, rather this is a nod to the Infinity Mag build by Relentless Zen, so shoutouts to them, they did it first. The Penta is cool too, I guess, but what if we could combine the Penta's projectile behavior and the Tenet Arca Plasmor's damage output together now? Well, hello Felarx, you overpowered piece of ass. It doesn't actually feature infinite punch through, but rather you can mod it so high that it will feel close to it, thanks to the dual chamber buff on its Torid Incarnon evolution. On top of that, this thing is in general just way too fucking strong. Again, thanks to the fucking 2000% damage increase with the devastating attrition buff on the 5th evolution. Did I mention that the Felarx is an overpowered piece of ass yet? I run it with Shotgun Vendetta for the additional 180% multi-shot and the 75% reload speed. On top of that, a little bit of punch through, Blasted Electric for the elements, and Point Blank for the serration damage. Thanks to us not utilizing crit on this weapon, it also scales insanely well with our Magnetize bubble. Remember that Magnetized targets receive a flat damage multiplier? With that shit added on top, the Felarx just goes insanely hard in level cap Void Cascade. Oh, and let's not forget about gun CO, cause that shit calculates both in base and in Incarnon mode multiplicatively.
Hello, I'm a piece of garbage.
So, Baker told me to use it. And thanks, dude. This is my new fucking favorite weapon with Mag. Okay, I'll be honest. I didn't think too much of the Sporothrix until I started properly messing around with it. And damn, this shit fucks. The Sporothrix shoots barbs, which stick to an enemy and explode after a few seconds. When we utilize Volatile Variant, the barbs will receive 3 meters of punch through, and on top of that, it allows the barbs to explode instantly on contact, with an additional 4 meter radius and 50% status chance. If this was balanced, I would just stop here, but it isn't. Some of you might remember that I referred to Sci-Fi Freak's video on punch through in my previous video on Mag, with one of its big points being on-contact explosions and how it behaves with punch-through. You can probably guess where I'm going with this. The Sporothrix has multiple hit registrations. And on top of that, it will cause an explosion for each time an enemy gets hit by the barb. So of course my natural response was to mod the hell out of punch-through with this weapon. Nah, hold up. Don't get too cocky now. Because Volatile Variant will lock you down to the 3 meters of punch-through. Now does that in turn mean that the weapon sucks? Fuck no. Instead, we'll have a lot more freedom when it comes to modding. Right now I'm running gas, electric, slash, and viral on this fucking thing, thanks to the Sporothrix having initial viral. Let's just take a look at a single shot into the bubble. Oh wait, some enemies are still alive? Well, that's because we're killing too fast. If we use a group of 20 heavy gunners with Merciless stacked... Yeah, it's okay.
I'm a piece of garbage.
Its gun CO is also calculated additively, but who the fuck cares when you get numbers like that? Anyways, we're talking way too much about multiple hit registrations and shit like that, so let me get my amp out of the way real quick. This is my 547 amp. The 4 stands for whatever reason, the Glaive Altfire has no hit registration limits. If you manage to cast a mag bubble before you die and then proceed to alt fire into it, you will revive almost instantly. Just wanted to give that piece of info real quick, moving on. Multi-hit registration weapons are amazing to have, but they aren't the only valid thing to use with mag. Beam weapons, for example, are also great to have. But, god damn it, that's not what I meant. Alright, get your pitchforks out. I don't like this weapon.
Get the f out, man!
Running Torid on mag isn't as good as you may think. Yes, I said it, Torid bad. Hear me out first. The mag bubble scales best with multi-shot. And while the Torid does scale with multi-shot on its beam and Incarnon mode, its AoE explosion doesn't, which will deal the most damage inside of the bubble, resulting in really low damage numbers from the bubble itself. On top of that, the Torid is a weapon that utilizes crits a lot to its own advantage, which doesn't scale with the bubble at all, so yeah, overall it kind of falls off here. What I'm trying to say is, it's not a bad weapon at all, but it scales horribly with the fucking mag bubble.
Bunut fuck. Torid can get 2 more chien with primed firestorm. Very upi with bubble.
That's such peak misinformation, bruh. The mod works as it says it would. It increases the blast range. It's just the fact that the Incarnon has an invisible AoE. And if you hit more enemies with that invisible AoE wherever you're pointing your Torid at, of course you're gonna spread wider. Explaining that in detail isn't my job, because someone already did it, and way better than I ever could. So please go ahead and show some love to Malurf. He decided to code an entire fucking AoE simulator, just so people can understand how it works. Absolute madman, thank you for your dedication. But yeah, problem arises when we actually want to stay inside the bubble with our damage, and not go outside of it. You saw it in the intro for a second. It messes up our setup, depending on how you want to play mag. I can't stop you from running Torid, because in the end it all comes down to preferences. Who cares? Just know about the stuff that I just said. And if you want to run it, I really suggest just running it without Primed Firestorm. The Phantasma, on the other hand, is a beam weapon that you can run with mag without facing any issues, as it scales with multi-shot, has an initial full body punch through, and its beam won't escape outside of your bubble. Now, would this be my #1 pick? Nah. But it's a great alternative to other weapons. Also one that's rather easy to obtain, at least once you reach MR9. It feels really comfortable to use when running it with, who could have guessed, Viral and Electric. Since it features multiplicative gun CO, it can get quite silly with the DPS. Its altfire is also a nice complement with mag, since the bomblets that are created won't even get a chance to fly anywhere. Instead they just straight up crash into the bubble center. Weapons that work perfectly, for example, would definitely be either the Kuva Nukor, Tenet Cycron, or the Atomos. Worst part about this is, they work better than ever. We already discussed why Magnetic as the progenitor element is nice to slap on top of a Kuva or Tenet weapon. In this case, Nukor or Cycron. All we need to do now is find something that works really well when we know we can proc a lot of status effects in a short amount of time. Hi Blast. Don't worry, it gets worse. They hold Multio for both the beams and the chains created. And with the existence of Secondary Encumber, which at rank 5 has a 24% chance to proc another random status effect on a status proc, shit hits the fan pretty fast. This is my general build for the Nukor. For my build, I focus on multi-shot and fire rate for the most amount of procs, Hornet Strike will scale our damage, 60-60 cold and heat for blast, and for whatever reason, Seeker. So, why is that here? Seeker can actually increase the amount of chains created by the Nukor. Same applies for the Cycron and Atomos, of course. One thing we must note here is that the interaction with punch through and chains is considered a bug, so it usually phases in and out of the game at random points. The Atomos doesn't come with a progenitor element, but instead you'll get an Incarnon adapter, which turns your little piss laser into a fucking Mega Man blaster.
Who the hell is Steve Jobs?
Okay, this will be a longer one. Where the hell do we even start? How about my favorite, the Mutalist Cernos? So, what's so good about it? Well, two things. First of all, this weapon can create a gas cloud with forced toxin procs. This allows us to mod for corrosive and electric, which normally wouldn't be possible. Means that it already gives us a base as a really decent self-primer, which leads us to reason 2, CO shenanigans. Because this weapon holds some really wacky gun CO behavior. Charge shots hold additive gun CO with a CO factor of 50%, while quick shots hold multiplicative gun CO with a 100% CO factor. So far so good, right? Well, shit gets funny when we take a look at the clouds, because they have their own CO scaling. Quickshot clouds hold multiplicative CO with a 100% CO factor, while the charge shot clouds hold additive CO. And hold on to your Kaizen ADX now. It has a 4100% CO factor, which means we can use a charge shot for priming and deal damage with the quick shot. Here's a group of enemies to demonstrate it on. They no longer fucking exist! Alright, so personally, I use Corrosive Electric and Blast with Longbow Sharp Shot and Split Flights, as Split Flights works really well with the Cernos. That's because the gas clouds that are created by the Mutalist Cernos can re-trigger Split Flights over and over again. And when we're actually using the weapon in-game, we can combine it with the Mag Bubble to consistently trigger Longbow Sharp Shot. Other than that, Hammer Shot for higher crit damage and status trans, Rifle Elementalist for higher status damage, and a Riven mod with Heat, Multi-Shot and Crit chance. One thing to note here is that the one-shot that you're seeing relies heavily on RNG. Trust me, we've tried to come up with a setup for like 4 hours in a simulacrum session, and we couldn't get a fucking setup to work. But don't worry, that doesn't mean that you cannot run this setup in regular gameplay, because there you will proc Charge Shot almost all the time, even for your additive charge shots. And in a worst case scenario, you use 2 quick shots to kill instead of 1. By far my favorite bow. Love this thing. If you don't want to bother with all the stuff that makes the Mutalist Cernos so good, and rather have something that just one-shots, play the Dread with its new Unseen Dread augment. It's kind of silly to just stay permanently invisible with Mag, and on top of that, you will receive an additional 175% crit damage whenever you're invisible. As we all probably know, when we're using an Incarnon adapter, we can also get initial heat on the Incarnon shots, which gives us the base to mod for gas damage. If we now also count in the good Riven disposition of the Dread, we can mod for high crits, which will work amazingly with gas. I usually don't like using bows like the Nadaruk Paris or Dread Incarnon, as they're easily outclassed by the Plasmor or Sporothrix for example, but in the case of the Dread with its augment now, I feel like it's gonna be a decent contender for my endurance runs. Even if the shot doesn't have multiple hit registrations, it still shines with the augment mod. And not to forget, it also has multiplicative gun CO. Like, genuinely, this fucking weapon is crazy.
Oh hi, thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
There really isn't much to say. The Aeolak is arguably the strongest rifle in the game, if we don't count the Torid as a rifle and rather as a weapon of mass destruction. The best way to describe it, it's a better Stalta. High Riven disposition, insane base stats, and multiplicative gun CO turn this rifle into an absolute fucking monster. The best part about it is, there is no need for a Riven at all, and yet we still get a fucking super high Riven dispo. It's absolutely insane at base, and just becomes godlike with a Riven slapped on top. I personally run it with Gas Electric for the Mag Bubble. This will still kill single targets effortlessly, but in the end you can run close to anything. That's how fucking good the Aeolak is. Use Merciless, get status trans, get status. Use your galvanized fuck shit for status. Put multi-shot and punch through on it. You're fine, you're good to go. This is the fucking single-handedly most broken fucking rifle in the game. I don't get how this shit exists. The Zenistar was always good with Mag. I used to run it Baker style as a bubble primer with heat for additional armor reduction on enemies. But since Galvanized Reflex got added, it got a little bit funnier. Before you had to manually hit melee attacks to increase the combo count of the Zenistar. Well, anything that came from the disc wouldn't count towards the combo count, which is essential due to the disc's lifespan scaling higher the more combo count you have. But now, Galvanized Reflex fixes that issue. With each kill you get, you increase your initial combo by 20, which stacks up to a maximum of 5x combo. Which makes building for something like Blast Influence quite valid now. Armor strip the room with Fracturing Crush, and just watch the mess unfold. Very fucking silly. Keep in mind that modding for attack speed will impact the tick rate of the disc. Same applies to range and the radius at which it will deal damage. That's why Spring-Loaded Blade, for example, is a very nice mod to have on the Zenistar, if you don't have a Riven, for example. But if you need a Riven or want one, I highly suggest running attack speed, range, or status trance, for example.
In the night, come alive. Ain't it sneak? Ain't it?
We fucking love fishing season. The Edun is a pole arm which can be thrown on heavy attacks, and it goes pretty fucking hard with mag. It's not just the fact that it looks badass when you're throwing it, but you also get a forced blast proc with its straight explosion shortly after impact. And with the addition of the newly added galvanized reflex, we can consistently keep up a 5x combo. Means we can go all out on fucking heavy attacks. In terms of build, I gave it galvanized steel as it gives us crit chance with additional crit damage. That way we can condense the build a bit and fit other mods like Galvanized Elementalist and Condition Overload. For an Arcane, you can choose to maximize the status spread with Influence for better scaling damage. I also tried Melee Duplicate alternatively, but I didn't quite get the same numbers, mostly due to status procs. So yeah, I would say Influence it is here. It isn't just really fun to use, but also disgustingly fucking strong for some reason. Overall, very fun weapon to use. I give this one 5 out of 5 fish. Like I said, there's many more weapons that I could talk about. I mean, I didn't even touch the glaives yet, but if you want one to use, Path Assist, there you go. I mean, we're closing into 40 minutes into the video, so for now I think I covered a decent amount as it is. And I mean, who knows what might happen in the future, right? So let's not waste any time and let's continue with the actually serious stuff. Welcome to probably the most skipped to part of the video, but before we go on, please note that this section is dedicated to builds I regularly use in my gameplay. That means I will not include a beginner-friendly build for mag this time, but if you still need one, I already covered it in my first mag video. Sorry. Alright, so before we get into any build, here's my Arca chart setup. This is important because all of my other builds are built around this setup, running with 2 Tau Reds for ability strength, 2 Tau Yellow for casting speed, and a Tau Purple which replaces Equilibrium. Casting speed itself isn't just a quality of life, but it's also kind of essential to stay alive with mag. It will just make your time playing mag 10 times easier. Ability strength is there to quote-unquote min-max our mod capacity, as we get 130% initial ability strength, leaving us with A, 4 more strength needed to hit the maximum amount to full strip with Fracturing Crush, and B, a total of at least 190 ability strength if we decide to run Mold Augmented, which in turn gives us a 3.8x damage multiplier on our initial target of the mag bubble, giving us a great way to deal a lot of single target damage on an Acolyte, for example. With that shit out of the way, let's start with something you guys have seen pretty recently if you follow my shenanigans. This is already the tweaked version of the build I have used in my 10-hour level cap survival run, with Nova Umbral, Zero Nature, and Neff. But it also kind of turned into my main build, oops. The reason why I tweaked it is because I had some energy issues while running level cap in Void Cascade, and overall just survivability fixes. But the current build, as it is right now, is pretty close to perfection for me personally. So let's dive into it. First off, Pull is subsumed for Nourish. What a crime, I know. But this build is kind of a balance between solo active playstyle and a team-based playstyle. And Pull just kinda tends me to tweak into going lazy mode, so I removed it. For the Arcanes, I'm running Aegis and Arachne. Aegis will give us a 3% chance to recharge our shields, if our shields are damaged, giving us a solid foundation for shield tanking with our already provided abilities that replenish like a shit ton of shield. Alright, makes sense. But why Arachne? Well, the answer lies within Polarize shards. So, to fully understand my pick for Arachne here, we need to look at our Nourish subsume and the behavior of Polarize shards again. As hinted at earlier, the Polarize shards are coded as weapons in the game. which makes them applicable for the Nourish buff. So now our Polarize shards can not just proc, slash and puncture, but also viral. While Arachne gives us another 150% additional damage while it's active, further fueling our damage output. Kinda fucking funny, kinda fucking useful for me. If you don't fuck with it, Roar or Zada's Whisper is also decent, but you'll obviously miss out on the viral buff and the energy replenishment. Intensify and Growing Power will be our go-to mods for ability strength, since we're not using Molt Augmented in this build. When Growing Power is active, we will get a total of 185 ability strength, which is equivalent to a 3.7x damage multiplier for Magnetize, and a 4.6x damage multiplier on our Polarize explosions. Augur Reach and Stretch will both make sure that we have enough range for all of our abilities. Alternatively, you can run Arca and Stretch with a companion that can proc Electric for further energy regeneration. I personally don't use it, because I use the same polarization for all of my builds. I'm a lazy bum, okay? Primed Flow and Energy Nexus will both secure us in terms of energy consumption, because if you run against level cap enemies, you'll be using your 3 and 4 a shit ton for survivability in an active playstyle. To further bump out the issues of enemies getting quite annoying during level cap runs, I run counterpulls to disable enemy weapons like a boss. Alongside it, I run Fracturing Crush for Armor Strip, which leaves our enemies extremely vulnerable to our kit. And for situations that might get a little bit too freaky, I have Rolling Guard with me, which gives us additional 3 seconds of Ivy frames on top of our 1.7 seconds of Shield Gate Ivy frames. The same kind of applies to Prime Sure-Footed, even though we all know it's a massive DPS increase, right? Nah, I just don't like knockdowns. So, in all of this mess, where does the Equilibrium Shard make any notable impact here? By running Synth Deconstruct on our companion. Enemies injured by the companion will have a 25% chance to drop a health orb when killed. And when we're pairing this with the energy restoration buff from Nourish, it just works too fucking well for me. And if we're speaking about companions, speaking for the Komi update, you can run close to any companion nowadays. But if you want to go for a level cap scenario, I definitely suggest running a Hound with Synergized Prospectus, Contagious Bond, Vicious Bond, Manifold Bond, and Equilibrium Audit in this specific order. These are essentially the Hound's abilities, and they will cast them in which order you mod them for. And with this setup, the Hound will perma-spam abilities due to Manifold Bond reducing the Hound's cooldowns. That way we can spam status effects with the Hound. And if he gets a kill, Contagious Bond kicks in, which spreads the inherited status effects in a 9-meter radius. For the Hound weapon, I use the Akaten solely because I have a Riven mod with crit chance and damage to Grineer on it, but running the Lacerton with Shattering Impact would make up for such a better setup. My companions are still a bit scuffed, I still need to work on that. We mod this for Viral Electric with Prime Pressure Point and Melee Elementalist, Condition Overload, and Lasting Sting. Other than that, you can also run a Meche Predacite, Panzerwolperphyla, or Diriga. A more passive playstyle variant of this build would be my solo endurance survival build, as this build heavily depends on the bubble to be lazy. This is not an AFK build, just a lazy one. Alright? I hope I made myself clear enough, DE. Here I subsumed Ensnare over Polarize, as Ensnare is a really nice way to deal with Acolytes, not just because the Acolyte gets fully silenced on a cast, but Ensnare will also bring enemies close to the Acolyte, making him extremely vulnerable to any weapon that has multiple hit registrations. I decided to lower the duration a little bit with Transient Fortitude, just so I have more windows open to collect loot using Greedy Pull after a bubble explosion, totaling the duration of the bubble and Ensnare at around 10 seconds. Just note that Acolytes can also remove debuffs off of themselves every 3 seconds, which also includes Ensnare and Debubble. In turn to the previous build, we get a lot more ability strength with this one, which we will sacrifice again to run Overextended. But we can also get that ability strength back by running Molt Augmented and Growing Power for a total of 210% ability strength, or a 4.2x damage multiplier on the initial target of the bubble. Primed Flow and Streamline will secure our energy consumption, and this time I added an extra layer of protection in the form of Primed Redirection to get a full 2.5 seconds of Ivy frames after shield breaking. That way I have enough time to react when I'm too distracted watching the Talk to a podcast in the background. For the augment mods, I have decided for Fracturing Crush for the armor strips and Greedy Pull for laziness. And oh yeah, I forgot to throw Aegis in there somewhere, so yeah, that shit is there as well. Oh wait, I forgot another thing, foot maxing. For the companions, before the Komei update I would have probably said Smidekavad. Now that we have the Resource Charm buff as a mod, I'd say my preferred choice is Panzerwolperphyla, with the Metre Predacite being a close second. But for now I'll stick to the Panzer. I use a pretty default Panzer setup, overall just a status spread build, with Restorative Bond added on top to revive the fucker if he's down. Only notable thing here is I don't use Fetch because of max passive. The claws are built around slash electric and gas damage, while I would still say that the elusive posture might be a better pick, when we're talking endurance at least, since I would definitely run this with resourceful retriever to grant him max our loot. But if you don't care about the loot, run the Hound instead. It's just by far the best companion for level capping. In a scenario where I ever find myself playing a disruption mission, I run Smite with Mag. The short explanation is, Smite deals 35% of an enemy's total HP as damage. Inside of a Magnetize bubble, Smite usually opts to target an enemy's head. AKA, as of right now we're dealing the 35% of the enemy's total HP as damage, times the headshot multiplier and times the Magnetize multiplier. But that's not all. First of all, we can increase the incoming damage with viral procs. The compressor is ideal for priming here, especially since DE finally decided to fix the compressor's interaction with the mag bubble. But that's not the only thing we can do to increase our overall damage output. We can use Arcane Arachne and Vigorous swap here to our advantage, because these two will scale our damage output of Smite multiplicatively, thanks to the fact that Smite is coded as weapon damage in the game. Overall, pretty simple build. High ability strength, lower duration. In theory, you can also replace Arcane Energize with something like Mold Augmented for higher bubble scaling. And yeah, I've decided for Arcane Arachne instead of Vigorous swap to min-max for survivability and energy restoration. Overall, genuinely such a fun build to use. But if you want to know more about it, please check out Dystopia's video on it. They already explain it in great detail, and I don't want to leech their views. So yeah, please give them a watch. It wouldn't be my video if I didn't showcase something utterly fucking stupid here as well. And by stupid, I don't even mean good stupid, I mean stupid stupid. Wrathful Advance with Mag is an interesting choice, but also really fucking fun with the newly added Galvanized melee mods. Most of the thrown melees are really good in general now, excluding the glaives, they were good already, but you can further bump up the Salinas with Wrathful. It makes gas dots hit really fucking hard, and overall it's just a nice switch from the usual slop we have. I mean, this is still slop, just not the average slop. But that's not all there is to it. You can also run something that in general just hits really fucking hard. Mod it for heat, max out every possible multiplier, match it with a heat primer, for example the Tysus, that has its faction damage stacked through the fucking roof, and then we can go to town. Is this a good build? Fuck no. But I mean, I don't know, it's kind of funny to use and I like big numbers. There's many factors that play into this build. For example, I run the Tysus instead of the Epitaph, just because the Tysus has a way better Riven disposition. Means we can get higher values for damage to Grenier. Encumber will prime the enemy with more status effects. Then I have the separate prime damage to Grenier. We shoot the stupid target. And if we hit for heat now with the Magistar, all the faction multipliers will be brought over to the Magistar, where it will again benefit from the damage to Grenier mods on the Magistar itself, and overall just condition overload and everything. And then you can hit a target. Yippee, big damage number. This build fucking sucks ass, man. Listen, if you guys want to have fun with melees, this is cool. But if you just want the high single target damage, just run Smite, please. Just run the Smite setup that I just showed. This is so fucking... This is negative cooking. This is putting shit back in the freezer. Hiding it under the table so fucking Marco Pure White won't slap the fuck out of you.
No, I didn't make Gordon Ramsay cry. He made himself cry.
Some fucking nasty ass fucking mold ass shit. But I like my damage number drippy, bruh. Don't mind the fucking mold all around the fucking build. And then maybe you'll have a nice time. Just maybe. If the Magister build had fucking mold in it, Breach Search is fucking foul. Alright, so here's my best shot at explaining this. Any Warframe scientist, correct me if I'm wrong. Magnetize's stored damage value gets increased once every time a projectile hits an enemy inside the bubble. We already know how this works by now. This means literally anything considered as weapon damage counts towards the total value, which means damage dealt by abilities can also count toward the total value, as long as they're coded as weapon damage in the game. The shurikens from Ash do that, for example. The problem arises when we take a closer look at Breach Search and how it works. Because Breach Search can create search sparks in the form of a homing projectile that will seek out the head of an enemy within 10 meters. One thing to note here is that these sparks can only be triggered by an external source, aka it just means that we cannot trigger a spark with another spark. But yeah, those sparks are counted as weapon damage in the game, which means we can increase the total stored damage value of the bubble by using Breach Search. A spark's final damage is calculated by the incoming damage dealt on an enemy times the damage multiplier of Breach Search. With base values, the spark will turn a kill shot with 1000 damage into 2000 damage. And if we decide to add the bubble into the mix, shit gets really fucked up. Like I said, I will try my best to explain this here, which also means I will bend the rules of the game a little bit now, just for the sake of easier understanding. If we kill the initial target of the bubble while Breach Surge is active, with a 1000 damage shot into the bubble, the 1000 damage will be divided by 4 and added to the bubble as tick damage. The bubble from now on will be dealing 250 damage per tick. At the same time, the damage will be doubled by the bubble to 2000 total damage, thanks to the 2x initial target multiplier, which will create a Surge Spark, where the 2000 total damage will be multiplied by 2 again, totaling for 4000 damage now. The spark now travels to the closest enemy nearby. This guy will be hit by the Surge Spark, totaling for 4000 damage. The 4000 damage will be divided by 4 again, for 1000 damage added to the bubble. This is the basic setup for the feedback loop we're about to create. The bubble now deals 1250 damage per bubble tick. The next enemy affected by Breach Surge that dies from the 1250 damage tick will multiply that damage again by 2 and move to the next target, totaling for 2500 damage, which is divided by 4 again for 625 additional tick damage to the bubble, totaling for 1875 tick damage. As long as enemies die inside of the bubble from the Surge Sparks, the bubble will basically feed itself damage. With base values, it doesn't sound too crazy, but I mean, I can also just flip it with quote-unquote realistic numbers. AKA, the initial target will take 500,000 damage, which gets multiplied by 6 from Breach Surge, dealing 3 million damage. 25% of it gets added to the mag bubble, aka 750,000 damage per bubble tick, which will then get another 6x multiplier, which then hits for 4.5 million damage on hit. 25% of that value, or 1.1 million damage, gets added to the mag bubble, for a total of 1.87 million damage per bubble tick. This times 6 for 11 million damage on it, and so on and so on. Welcome to Warframe, guys. This game is balanced. The build itself is pretty simple. In the first place, you just want to stack the hell out of strength to raise the damage multipliers of Breach Surge and Magnetize. Have at least a little bit of duration left, so you can actually properly scale your mag bubble. Range will greatly help us with the pulling of enemies, as well as widen our Breach Surge range. Most notable here is that I run Arcane Arachne again. That's because the final damage of the Surge Sparks actually multiply with Arcane Arachne, which will give it a crazy fucking damage boost. Is it effective in regular gameplay? Nah, not really. Is it a massive fucking dopamine rush? Hell fucking yeah it is. Let's move over to something that has less stupid numbers going on, but rather stupid behavior. Both Subsumes, Well of Life and Blood Altar can place an enemy in an invulnerable state. While invulnerable, the targeted enemy is not completely immune to everything happening in the game. They can still be affected by abilities, for example the bubble. Means if we cast Well of Life or Blood Altar, we can cast a Magnetize bubble on top of that enemy, and that way we can pull in enemies with the bubble for whatever amount of duration we decide to mod for. By utilizing the Secura Penta, we can have a permanent projectile with multiple hit registrations inside of the bubble, which will now constantly deal damage as long as the bubble is up. Let's do some theoretical talk, because I'm re-recording this after Devstream 182 happened. A part of the 1999 update will be the Light Trinity rework. This includes changes to Well of Life, where it will receive the additional ability to consume someone's death as long as they're in range of Well of Life. If they don't alter that for the Helminth ability, then I really don't know what D is cooking, man. Imagine your average stationary Secura Penta build, but with the additional ability to never fucking die. I don't know how to feel about that, if I'm being honest. Because it would make survival endurance runs so much fucking easier. This is gonna fucking be funny as fuck. But speaking for the moment right now, I still prefer Blood Altar over Well of Life. This might change once the 1999 update is out. Well, these were some of the builds I run. I gotta say, for the fact that I don't use Polarize as much in most of my builds, the Polarize Nourish build is probably my favorite at the moment. Just because it's a great balance between being a powerhouse while still supporting your teammates by keeping them alive with a constant shield generation and energy replenishment. Overall, just a very comfy and versatile build. While my least favorite probably has to be Breach Surge. Don't get me wrong, Breach Surge can be fun if you're running solo and you want the big numbers, but for team play it's like completely useless, since all it needs to not function is another nuke frame which nukes more efficiently than you. For example, a Dark Verse Nezha. But yeah, still a good build. Smite and Wrathful are both cool, while I think Smite's probably more fun as it's like more effective in general, and Wrathful is kind of just there to either go silly with melees or fucking go really stupid with a Magistar. I don't know, man. For comfortable long survival missions, I will definitely continue to pledge to the Baker's Club and run my endurance build with Ensnare. It's just really comfortable to use and especially a great setup for weapons with multiple hit registrations. Speaking of which, what do we even do in a solo survival endurance run? Me and Baker sat together to discuss some of the essentials we want to throw into your way if you ever want to consider trying an endurance run with Mag. From positioning to influencing enemy spawns, all the way over to how to use the bubble and how to stay alive. At least if you want to do it the lazy way and stand in one spot. So let's not yap too much and actually get started with positioning. The ideal setup for a funnel is to have 3 entry points for enemies, ensuring their coverage into a single area before coming within range of you. This helps maximize the effectiveness of Magnetize for both scaling and enemy gathering. Based on Baker's experience, a distance of 30 to 40 meters between you and the final gathering point works the best, as most of the mobs in the game have slightly shorter attack ranges than the 30 to 40 meters. This gives you enough time to react and cast Magnetize efficiently. Please keep in mind that mobs typically spawn in adjacent rooms or up to 2 rooms away from your location, which means it's important to monitor where they're spawning and keep track of the distance to your position, as even a well-designed free entry funnel can be inefficient if the travel time from their spawn point to you is too long. You should also avoid multi-level areas where the bubble can pull enemies out of line of sight from your direct damage. In such cases, those enemies will only die when the bubble expires, which just slows down the process overall. A similar issue can happen if walls block your line of sight to the pulled mobs. When collecting loot, bullet jump towards the loot location, which should already be within an active Magnetize bubble. While airborne, cast Crush to maintain shield and crowd control as you approach the bubble. Once inside, move to the nearest edge of the bubble, cast Pull, and then recast a new bubble after the mobs have stopped ragdolling. This prevents the issue of mobs getting stuck floating inside the bubble. Casting the ability 3 times ensures that any old bubble is cleared and won't cause any future problems. The highest damage potential Baker has found with Mag involves spamming Magnetize and shooting into the bubble. This approach ensures that the pull effect remains strong while significantly boosting the damage output. Without the Magnetize discharge augment, each new Magnetize cast collapses the bubble placed 3 casts prior, maintaining a constant cycle. At higher levels, enemy damage makes it easier to hit damage cap, resulting in a continuous stream of high damage. This becomes particularly noticeable at around level 5000. Using Viral and Radiation with the Plasmor, for example, greatly enhances the strategy, making weapons like the Zenistar an effective primer, which will further enhance our damage, thanks to the Plasmor having multiplicative Guncio. The status effects cause enemies to attack each other, helping to scale the bubble's overall damage, allowing for an overall more relaxed playstyle. When spamming Magnetize, your positioning becomes more restricted, as it's important to avoid casting it in a too staggered pattern. Poor placement can significantly reduce the kills per hour, means maintaining tighter control over where you cast is crucial for efficiency. Ensuring there's a wall directly behind the mobs or positioning them at the bottom of stairs is crucial for the strategy, as it helps control enemy movement and optimize bubble stacking. The goal is basically stack the bubbles as efficiently as possible, and these barriers prevent enemies from getting pulled out of range, making a big difference in your overall effectiveness. And then, try yourself out. Go into a mission, try your best, do whatever you can, and the more experience you will gather, the further you will also go. Level capping isn't something you learn after watching one guide. You slowly build up on it, and the more you're willing to try stuff out, the further you will go. Don't be upset if you hit a limit. Instead, you should use your limit, note what issues you're facing, and then try to avoid these issues. This rule just doesn't apply to survival level cap specifically, but for any level cap. You can also try and get used to the high levels first. The Viri circuit takes roughly an hour and a half to level cap in, and with the additional buffs you receive, it feels like a nice playground to just test yourself out in. In Circuit specifically, you can notice how level increase affects the enemies, and what it will do to you. So at the end of the day, fuck around and find out. That's the best piece of advice I can give you personally. But, you know, the best is always kept at last. So let's raise this schizometer one last time, as we take a deep dive into some really unnecessary knowledge about mag. So, remember at the beginning of the video, how I talked about pull and how I provide a visualization of how it works? Well, you can forget about that now, because that was just there to give an easier understanding of the pull radius. In reality, pull's starting position is based off of your camera position, which means you're always missing a little bit of range. I think it's like roughly 1 to 1.5 meters from your position of your player model. And if we're talking about pull and the camera already, raising the field of view in the game's settings will actually influence how pull behaves, raising its 90-degree angle by approximately 10 to 15 degrees. Something that's more commonly known would definitely be the door bug. When you try to pull in enemies which are behind open doors, the door will close, as enemies that are in a ragdolled state won't trigger the event to open doors. Pretty fucking silly. Especially when nullifiers become invincible after being ragdolled by pull. Once the nullifier bubble pops and you pull an enemy close to you, this applies for any CC ability by the way that ragdolls enemies, the nullifier will stay invincible until he recharges his bubble. Another bug I found while messing with different units, Jade Light Eximus units can actually fuel the bubble's damage if the bubble is placed on the Jade Light Eximus unit that is currently attacking you. Pull isn't the only ability that suffers from engine-based issues. Magnetize does as well. To be specific, it's its tick damage. Due to quantization, which refers to the process of limiting continuous data to discrete levels to optimize performance, Max Bubble will not absorb a proper 25% of damage per projectile. During my testing with unmodded weapons, I've noticed that the Tenet Arca Plasmor and the Buslock have had the highest scaling, with 24.5% of its base damage being absorbed by the bubble as tick damage. Other weapons usually fell shorter, for example, the Volcar with 23.8%, the Lado with 20.6%, the Rubico with 16.5%, and the Sporothrix with 13.3%. The lowest number I could find from the few weapons that I've tested was the Perigale, with only 10.4% of its damage being absorbed per projectile. Please note that when we're applying serration mods, these numbers will shuffle around again. It's way too much work to actually document all of it, rather it's just some really unnecessary and silly knowledge. Completely useless if you ask me, but still fun to know. Mag is one of 14 warframes in the game that got the glimpse of the first implementation of arcanes in the game, in the variant of arcane helmets. With the Arcane Coil Helmet, which increases your ability range by 25% for a sacrifice of your maximum shields. And the Arcane Mag Gauss Helmet, which increased your maximum energy by 25% for a sacrifice of 3% of your sprint speed. These helmets were removed back in hotfix 13.2 or in 2014, and nowadays can only be acquired via trading, which I don't really recommend. They don't do too much, except costing way too much. But of course I still got one. If you equip one of these, it will automatically lock your first arcane slot, leaving you with only one arcane to equip. Which raises the question, are these even valid arcane replacements? Not at all. The arcanes we have nowadays are way too good to be sacrificed for either max energy or range, especially since we already get enough by just modding for it, or using Archon shards, at least in the energy max department. A silly interaction can happen when we use Vauban's Tether Coil in combination with Magnetize, as Tether Coil is not just limited to sticking to surfaces, but can also apply to fucking teammates. This isn't anything that will aid you in actual gameplay by the way, but rather something really silly. If enemies are hooked by the Tether Coil that's sticking on you, they will start flying around you. You can now apply a mag bubble onto an enemy that's hooked by Tether Coil, which prompts an invisible mag bubble. It will function like normal, but you can now drag a mag bubble behind you, at least as long as the initial target of the mag bubble doesn't hit a wall or the floor. If that actually happens, the tether coil will be removed and the bubble will be placed wherever it hit and will start behaving like normal again. Another silly thing can be seen when Grendel shoots his regurgitate charge, as the enemies that are being shot out of Grendel's stomach not just count as mobs, but also projectiles. Which means we can apply a mag bubble onto the enemy. If Grendel shoots into an empty mag bubble, the enemy will start flying around in it. If we then cast Magnetize on that projectile mob, we can have a mag bubble flying around in a mag bubble. I'm just yapping at this point, really, so we might as well just put an end to it here. We've reached the fucking end. Hallelujah. First of all, thank you all for your fucking patience. I know this took way too fucking long, but I hope it's justified and you are satisfied with the final product. I rewrote the script several times because I felt like I can do better, and am I fine with the final script as it is right now? Not really. I still feel like this could have been a way better project, but for the sake of it, it's fine for now, I think. My main intention was not to release half-explained, half-researched slop like I did last time. I mean, I researched the last video, but it was low-key ass. Did I do a better job this time? I think I did, yeah. The build parts for the weapons felt a bit short, but like I said, who knows what will happen in the future. For now, I'm gonna head out, as I need to annoy way more people with my bubble, as Mag feels like she was always just intended for me.
I was bored by the check, made $1 billion. Now fuck that bitch, I need a trillion. Now fuck that bitch, I need to feel it. Made me so damn mad, made me feel it. I will never give you time to I will never give a fuck if it I don't really give a fuck about you. You need a chick, you need to breathe. I'ma ask you to leave. Yeah, my money's so deep. And as far as I can tell, they wanna sound like